Okay, we're plugging along in our series on what are the attitudes I need if I'm going to get recovery and do it well. And it's important because a lot of people focus on recovery about what you need to do, and that's important to focus on, but it's just as important as to what attitudes do I need to have. Because without the right attitudes, usually you're not going to make it in recovery. So tonight I want to talk about the attitude of forgiveness. And it's going to take me 2 nights this week and next week to do it. And here's what. What comes out of complex trauma is you got hurt thousands of times. And you were hurt repeatedly. But as a child, you got angry and there was no way to resolve that hurt. The person didn't stop hurting you. The person wasn't sorry for what they did. But you couldn't express your anger, so you bottled it up, and it usually would turn into a resentment and an unhealthy expression of it. What I have found in people in recovery is that there's a lot of misunderstandings about resentment. And that's why I'm going to take tonight on resentments, because so many people don't understand resentments properly. If you've done the 12 steps of AA, Step 4, a fearless moral inventory. One of the top priorities is that you list your resentments. And I have done step 5s with many people, and it's always interesting to me how many think they have a resentment when it's really not a resentment. And others, they don't think they have a resentment there, but they really do. And so there's a lot of confusion. The healthy response to getting hurt and the way to resolve it is to forgive. But that has just as much confusion as resentments. A lot of misteaching that has done a lot of damage. And so next week we're going to talk about forgiveness and what that means. And it is a super important attitude if we're to move forward and get past all the hurts that we've experienced. And just in case you think that the hurts were only done to you in the past, one of the realities about recovery is you get hurt over and over again. It's not people who are perfect beside you. It's a lot of mixed up people who are very imperfect, and we tend to hurt each other. Maybe not intentionally, but it does happen. And so there's hurts that continue to need to be worked through if we're going to make it in recovery. So let me start on this resentment thing. I think in working with people over the last 15 years, most people, once they understand resentments, would agree that resentments are a big issue for them in recovery. If they don't deal with them, they tend to relapse. And if you've heard the term using at somebody, that usually means you have a resentment and now you're trying to punish them. I'll hurt you by hurting me, is what the thinking is. So I'm going to go get drunk or high, and that will break your heart, and that's my way of punishing you. So that is the resentment piece. And for many people, when they get angry and don't deal with it well, and it turns into resentment, it's a real trigger towards a relapse. As people get to know resentments and understand them, they begin to realize they've got a lot of them. And so they have them at their closest intimate relationships, mom, dad, friends, partner, even children, God, every authority in their life, every cop, EIA worker, CFS worker, you name it. And pretty soon they got resentments at the world. So it becomes just this big, big topic for them. But I have found over and over again that a lot of people, when I first teach resentments to them, they say, I don't have any. And what is really the truth is they've stuffed all of that stuff so far down, they're not even aware of it. But the reality is that even though you've stuffed it and you're not consciously aware of it, it's still bothering you. It is still affecting you in your life. So let me give you some of the definitions that you will hear when people talk about resentment. So one of the most common ones is a resentment is letting somebody else rent space in your head. And that's kind of a good definition. Another one that's very popular is that when you have a resentment, you take the poison pill that you intend for somebody else. So you want to poison them, but you end up poisoning yourself. And so the point is that resentments always hurt us. They affect us physically, emotionally, spiritually. And they lead to greater unhealthiness in our life, and they can make us soul dead. Another definition of a resentment is to hold a grudge. Now you'll see there's question marks on the next two. So I have people come and they say, I must have a resentment because that person that raped me, I want to see them pay. And I go, that might be a resentment, but it might not be. That might just be a desire for justice. So that becomes an important distinction, and we'll look at that in a little bit. And then others, and this is a common thing for people in early recovery, they go, I still feel anger about what that person did to me. And somebody says to them, you must have a resentment. And I go, maybe they do, but maybe they don't. Because there's anger that's healthy anger about stuff that's wrong that was done to you. And so maybe you're just starting to feel the anger that you've been denying for a long time. And so maybe the anger is actually a good thing, a healing thing, and it's not necessarily a resentment. So I'll try to describe that and explain it more as we go along. So let me give you a basic definition. A resentment is basically, I want to make somebody pay after they hurt me. So if somebody hurts me, it's now my agenda to hurt you back some way. Another way to say that is that if somebody hurts me, instead of letting other authorities execute justice, I appoint myself the police, the jury, the judge, and the executioner. And I am going to carry out my brand of justice to make that person pay. And so I need to hurt them somehow. And that becomes part of understanding this resentment definition. So let me say it another way. There's kind of 4 different types of causes of resentment. So I want to hurt somebody because 4 options. Number 1, they hurt me, and I want justice to be done, but I'm going to be the judge, jury, and executioner. I'm going to enact justice. So that's the most common one. But what I find with people from complex trauma is now there's 3 other things that can happen. And it takes new layers now. So the next one is this. You really annoy me. I don't respect you. So basically, I'm going to close my heart to you, and I have a resentment. You didn't do anything to hurt me, but you sure annoy me. And because of that, I don't like you, and I want to hurt you somehow. And that can happen if you feel somebody has disrespected you, or they're just acting immature, and it bugs you, and so you just want to hurt them. Then another one that is very common in a street mentality is this. I did something wrong. You didn't protect me from consequences, but you ratted me out. So now I have a resentment. And the reality is I'm the one that did the wrong. You're the one that did the right. But I have a resentment because you did the right thing. And that is a very common way of people looking at that leads to a lot of resentments. Then the next one is the tricky part, and it goes like this. Complex trauma causes me to read hurt into people's actions that's not even there. So I think they're trying to hurt me when they're really not. But because I've been hurt so much, I jump to worst case scenario thinking. And so somebody does something and I get offended. Give you an example. When we were in Barrie, I was talking about disrespect, and a guy came to me afterwards and he says, I just had something happen. I was taking a guy to get some help, and he was being pushy and trying to talk over people. So the leader said, wait your turn. And that person stormed out into the parking lot and paced back and forth. How dare they disrespect me? I should go back in there and just rip the guy a new one. And they were just steamed up that because the person set a boundary, that they were disrespecting them. So now they had a resentment against that leader who was just asking the guy to be polite. And that's what can happen. And so it's easy to start accumulating all these resentments when people really haven't done anything to hurt you. You just create that in your own mind. And so lack of respect or disrespect tends to be the one that people pick up the most. Okay, now you might say, I'm still not convinced I have a resentment. And what you're thinking is this: how do you define wanting to hurt people back? And so in your mind, it's getting out a shotgun and letting them have it, or it's going and just ripping them a new one, calling them down, being as mean as possible, punching them in the face, whatever. And that's the very in-your-face type of expression of a resentment. And so a lot of people think that's the only style of resentment, of expressing a resentment, of hurting somebody back. So let me give you a couple that maybe you haven't thought of. So there's a subtle type of thing that goes like this. If my wife has annoyed me and I don't want to deal with it and I just want to hurt her back, I just push her buttons all day. Before you know it, she's just fuming mad and I'm grinning on the couch because I made her pay. But if she says, you're being mean, I go, no, I'm just joking around. And I can wiggle out of that one. So that's one way that we do. Some of you grew up with a parent who, when they wanted to hurt you, they withheld love. So you would go for a hug and they wouldn't give you a hug. You would try to talk it out and they wouldn't talk to you. They gave you the silent treatment, the cold shoulder, and that hurt a lot. Some of you wish they would have screamed at you rather than give you the silent treatment because that hurt so much. Others of you, you don't go to the person directly to call them down. You just post stuff on Facebook. Or you go and tell everybody about what a jerk that person is. And you spread gossip and rumors and you just tear them apart and you get it out there. And that's a subtle way. The other person doesn't even know what you're doing. But you're hurting them. And then some of you, you just cut people right out of your life. They want to work it through. They want to try to repair the damage. They apologize. And you go, sorry, bud. You refuse to talk to them. If they come in a room, you just walk right out. And you're making it loud and clear that you have no use for them. And you're hurting them by that. But some of us are even sneakier than that. So we actually have resentments if we do some hidden stuff. Somebody hurts you, and do you ever enjoy fantasizing about 100 different ways you could kill them and not get caught? Or think up a whole bunch of different ways that you could really make them pay? And you go through these thoughts and you just enjoy playing it over and over in your head. That's resentment stuff that is hidden from everybody else, but it's loud and clear inside your brain. And then another thing that I use to tell if I have a resentment towards somebody is this. If there's somebody that I respect and I see them helping an old lady across the street, I go, aren't they a great person? But if somebody's I got a resentment and they help an old lady across the street, I go, I bet you they're doing it just to get something from them. I assign a bad motive. It doesn't matter what good they do, I will find something negative to say about it. And if I do that, I know I've got a resentment. Because I don't even want to look at the person honestly anymore. I just want to put them in a negative light all the time. And that is evidence of a resentment. Or you can maybe not pray, but you can hope something bad happens to them, that they get what's due and get what's coming to them. And those are all those internal things. Okay, now having said that, I want to give you an example and let you think it through with me. And the example is a very difficult one, but many of you will relate to it. It's somebody who's been sexually abused. So some of the deepest hurt is done through that. This sexual abuser has never apologized. They've never been arrested, never experienced any legal consequences. And now you are in recovery and you're trying to deal with this. And what you're realizing as you learn about yourself and about abuse is how much that has affected you negatively. You start to see the ripple effect of those events early on that continue to affect and hurt your relationships today. And so it's like the hurt deepens the more you learn about the effects of sexual abuse. And it's like you get stabbed over and over again. So then what happens? You get furious. That doesn't mean you have a resentment. That means for the first time you're allowing yourself to validate the hurt. And anger is part of the healing journey when we begin to deal with deep hurts. Then you just want to see them hurt and get punished. That's not necessarily a resentment. It's that you want to see justice. You want to see that person made to pay for what they've done. And so far there's no resentments there. And then somebody might come along and say, you should just forgive them, and that means you can just let them back. Let's say it's an uncle, let them back into your life and act like nothing happened. And you go, I can't do that. I can't trust this person. I'm not even letting them in my house. And they go, you got a resentment. No, you're just setting boundaries with somebody that's dangerous. And that's a good thing. So having anger, setting boundaries, wanting to see them punished, not trusting them, does not mean you have a resentment. It means you're dealing with this healthy. Where the resentment comes in is when I want to take justice into my own hands. Okay? And then for some people, they might say, you know what? It's time I charge this guy. I need to go to the cops because he's still doing it to other people. And others might say, oh, you shouldn't do that. That's not forgiveness. You know what? That's nothing to do with forgiveness. That is actually loving all the other women in the world and trying to stop a predator. And that's a loving and a good thing. So let me take that then a little bit further to understand this resentment. So I think you got the concept. Now the question always is why is it so hard to let go of resentments? Why do I hang on to them? And what you'll find if you're honest with yourself is it's super hard to let go of resentments. It's super hard to forgive. Why is that? And I think there's a bunch of reasons, and each one adds to the difficulty in letting go of resentments. So he talked about that deep sense of justice built into us. So if somebody hurts somebody, there should be a painful consequence. There should be a form of justice. What I find with many of the people I deal with and many of you is that you know our justice system is quite broken at times. And so if you want justice to be done, there's a chance it might not get done by the justice system. And so you might be inclined to say, why tell the justice system it's never going to get done, or the person might get charged and then be out in a couple months. I'm going to do it myself. And so that is a strong temptation. Secondly, we've talked about there is pleasure that comes from nursing a resentment. It just feels like a candy. You roll around your tongue, and it's kind of sweet to go through it over and over again about how you're going to mess this person up. But then let me take you to some new ones. Many people hang on to resentments because they want to keep the pain alive so they don't drop their guard. So keeping the anger and the pain alive keeps them sharp. And the fear is if I start letting go of resentments, then I might start relaxing and then I'll get hurt again. And so that is a huge fear with many people. But what I want you to understand is this. By keeping the pain alive, you keep giving that person power over your life. You're still letting them control your thinking, your actions, your emotions. They still have you captive. So you can't be free as long as you hang on to it. You keep giving them power to mess you up. And that is really what you have to face when you think about, should I let this go or not? So the last thing you want to do is give this person power, but by hanging on to the resentment, you do give them power. And so that has to be considered. Next, as long as you hang on to resentment, you're stuck at that point in the past. You can't move past it and be free of its effect. You aren't able to resolve it and heal and grow from it. You grow to that point and then you stop. You get stuck and you are kept in the past. You can't move on. And then, if you hang on to a resentment, it's going to hurt you. It will begin to change you. It will begin to cause you to become more and more angry, more and more bitter, and it will mess you up. I think a lot of people think that they can put a resentment in a little compartment and it won't affect the rest of them. But you all know what happens when you allow yourself to have a resentment? You then pick up resentments every person that ticks you off. And so now you don't just have the one resentment, now you got 25 resentments. And then you just keep picking up more and you get angrier and angrier and angrier. And it begins to change you. But more than that, you have a priority and it starts to go into your intimate relationships as you hurt me, I hurt you. That used to be just with people you didn't care about. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. But the more resentments you get and the more you want to hurt people back, the more it starts to creep into your intimate relationships. And do you want to know what then happens when you have conflict? You take all the things that they've done that hurt you in the past and you drag them all out and use them as ammunition. And you did this and you did this and you did this and you're therefore the greatest scumbag in the world. And so that becomes what happens. It changes you, it hurts your relationships, and then it hurts those you love. And I think many of you have experienced that. And so resentments become this thing that I hang on to for all the wrong reasons. Let me just give you a couple other reasons why we hang on to it. I think many people in recovery need to have some form of anger inside of them at all times to feel alive. They're addicted to it. They need the energy from it. And so they keep some resentments there. And then the other purpose with it is when I'm angry, I don't feel hurt. When I'm angry, it medicates other negative emotions. So I want resentments because it keeps me angry. And then anger keeps people away. So it scares people off from hurting me more. So it becomes this shield that I need to try to protect myself. But the point is this, you only hurt yourself. So you're trying to keep yourself from being hurt by others, but you're hurting yourself. And so that is resentment. And hopefully what you realize as I've gone through this is that if you hang on to resentments, it is only damaging you. It is only going to mess up your recovery. It is only going to make you more and more unhealthy and is only going to hurt those you love. There's not one good thing that comes out of resentment. You can look at those things that I listed that you think are the good things, but those are only short-term things. Long-term, nothing good comes out of it. It makes you sicker physically, emotionally, spiritually, and it hurts your relationships. So if you've got resentments, and this is what the original founders of AA realized, resentments kill you. Resentments keep you from staying clean and sober. And so that was why the priority, the emphasis was put on deal with your resentments, learn to let them go. And that leads us to forgiveness, which is next week, where I'll talk about what that means to actually forgive a person. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. I was thinking of what's a good resentment story? or a potential resentment. So I thought of the final night before Jesus died. He spent what was the Passover feast in the Jewish culture. He spent his final meal with his 12 disciples. And at that meal, what he does is he tells his disciples, 2 things are going to happen. 2 of you are going to hurt me very badly. And if you kind of feel what these 2 hurts are, it will help you to really kind of capture the emotions that Jesus would have been feeling on that night. So before we get to that, what had just happened before that meal is Jesus had gone off by himself to talk to God and pray, and he started looking ahead at the next couple hours of what was going to happen to him. And we're told that he was so overwhelmed with stress and pain that he was actually sweating drops of blood. And that's medically possible, that a person under extreme stress can actually sweat blood. So that's the extent of just the stress that he was feeling. And he also says that he was so down and depressed it felt like he was going to die. So he's not in this wonderful place. He's in a really tough spot. So then he comes to the meal, and here's what he says. He says, one of you is going to deny that you even know me. So in my hour of deepest need, you're not going to be there for me. In fact, you're not even going to want to be identified as a friend of mine. And you can imagine how much that would hurt. And then one of you is going to betray me. One of you is actually going to the officials to say, I'll hand this guy over so you can kill him. And most of you have experienced betrayal. And I think it's one of the most painful emotions is that feeling of betrayal by somebody you thought was a very close friend. And so that is what's going on inside of Jesus, okay? So now I want to take you to the meal that he has with his disciples. Any of you seen that picture? That's Leonardo da Vinci's picture of the Passover. Do you realize that's nothing like what it looked like? Okay, so let's go to the next picture and I'll show you what it looked like. So you have to understand that culture, they didn't have a meal like we do. These mats would be close to the floor, and they would lie on their left side because everybody was right-handed, and then they would lie on their left side and they would eat, and the food would all be on that little circle. So there would be 3 couches in the shape of a horseshoe that went around that little table. And on that table would be the food. And so it'd be basically bread, something to dip the bread in, which was called a sop, and then you would eat it, okay? So that was the normal thing. So everybody's dipping their bread into the sop and eating. Okay, so let's go to the next picture because I want you to then see how this is done. The seating arrangement was super important, okay? So the blue couch, the one there on the left, you can see that the first person on that couch was referred to as the trusted friend of the host, who's Jesus. And then on the other side of Jesus is the honored guest, okay? And then on the opposite side, on the black couch, the first person is the servant. Okay, keep that in mind because I'm going to read to you the story. And it goes like this. Jesus was deeply troubled and he exclaimed, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. So he's letting them know, he knows one of them is planning to betray them. The disciples looked at each other, wondering who he could mean. They couldn't figure out which disciple would actually want to betray Jesus. They thought everybody loved him. The disciple Jesus loved was sitting next to Jesus at the table. So he's either going to be on the right side of Jesus or the left side, okay? Simon Peter motioned to him, so Simon Peter has to be kind of across from him where he can see and say, hey, woohoo, and get his attention. So Simon Peter motioned to him and said, who's he talking about? So the disciple leaned over to Jesus and asked, Lord, who is it? Now, leaned over, if you're on your left side and you're going to lean to talk to somebody, which side was John on? He was the trusted friend. Okay? And that makes him a teenage, we know he was a teenage boy, and he's given the trusted friend position. You imagine how that pissed off Peter? Because he thought he was the trusted friend. But look at Peter motioned to John. So guess where Peter was sitting? Opposite, Jesus stuck him in the servant position. That really made him mad. Because he thought he was big shot. And he was a little bit better than all the disciples. And we'll come back to that. Okay? And then Jesus responded, is the one to whom I give the bread I dip in the bowl. And when he dipped it, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, or Judas Iscariot. So what you would do, the host would do, was take bread, dip it, and give it to the honored guest. So who was the honored guest position? Judas. Now, isn't that amazing? If I had that happen to me and I knew Judas was going to be betraying me in another hour, he wouldn't be getting the honored guest position. He'd be in front of a shooting squad. And so that very seating arrangement allows us to figure out what is going on at that meal. And so Jesus, the honored guest, sends a signal and he dips stuff and he gives it to the honored guest. And all the other disciples say, Jesus is honoring Judas. Judas must be this wonderful guy. They don't even know what Judas is thinking, but Jesus knows. So, absolutely blows my mind how Jesus, feeling all the hurt of what Judas is about to do, gives him the most honored position at the table and honors him in front of all the other disciples. Do you want to know what I think he's doing? He's saying, Judas, I know what you're doing, but I still love you. Judas, I forgive you and I want to give you another chance to change your mind, to not go down this path that you've chosen to do. That just blows me away, that he was willing to do that. Then the next thing that Jesus does blows my mind as well. So as you can imagine, they would be out walking. Everybody wore sandals back then. They didn't have paved roads. It was all dusty trails. So when you got into a building, your feet were covered in dirt. And so the first priority was to wash your feet. And it was the servant's job, and it was always the lowest servant, the servant who was on the bottom of the totem pole, the one that got all the dirty jobs. It was his job to wash the feet because nobody else wanted to do it. And I can relate to that. I don't think that would be on my top 10 list of things to do if I got employed somewhere, is to wash people's dirty feet. But they sit down and nobody does it. And so Jesus gets up and he wraps a towel around his waist, gets some water, and he goes and he washes John's feet, the honored guest. Everybody gets that. And then he comes to Judas's feet. How would you feel about washing Judas's feet? Not great. And then he goes around the table and he comes to Peter, who is going to deny that he even knows Jesus. And he's going to hurt Jesus just as much as Judas was. And he purposely washes his feet as well. And I go, the fact that Jesus doesn't have a resentment, the fact that he still treats the people that are going to hurt him more deeply than he's ever been hurt, and he treats them with love as an honored guest and washing of their feet, blows me away. And that is why we call Jesus this person who's amazing. His character is such that we can never find fault with what he does. Now let me take you to that Peter thing. What we are told is as they were heading towards that final supper, Peter got in an argument with the other disciples. Do you want to know what he was arguing about? Who was going to be the greatest disciple? He thought he was the leader. And do you want to know what he said to Jesus when Jesus told him the day before that you're going to deny that you even know me? He said, even if all the other 11 disciples deny you, I will never deny you. In other words, what he is saying is, I love you more than anybody else. My heart is truer and purer than any of the other disciples. I'm in a league above them. So I should be the leader. And so they get to the meal, and Peter's all full of himself. And Jesus says, Peter, you sit here tonight in the servant spot. I don't think Peter enjoyed that meal a whole lot because he was just furious inside. But what was Jesus saying to Peter? He is saying, Peter, you are going to be a leader someday. You are gifted to be a leader. But being a leader isn't getting full of yourself. Being a leader, a good leader, is first learning to serve. So I am going to give you your first lesson in leadership. Be the servant. But from that position, Peter should have got up and gone around and washed the feet of the disciples. And he's going, I'm not lowering myself to that. I'll sit in this spot, but I'm not going to actually act like a servant. And so Jesus says, let me show you a true leader. And he gets up and he washes the feet. And he says, to become a great leader, you got to first become a humble follower and a humble servant. Isn't that a beautiful story? So now when you look at the picture of the Passover, you can say, no, that's not how they sat. They sat in a U around a table, and John was the honored guest, and Judas, he was the trusted friend. And Jesus honored him when he could have easily had a resentment. So I hope in my life I can follow the example of Jesus in forgiving and loving the people who hurt me, serving those people who hurt me, not carrying all of that resentment inside, forgiving, loving, and serving.